I did something today, and I turned off the stove, suddenly nervous, and she continued. I turned down the executive VP position, and I stared at her, because that promotion had been her goal for a decade, and she smiled. That vulnerable smile I'd first seen in her office, and said, I realized I've spent my whole life climbing a ladder without knowing where it leads, trying to prove I'm worthy of taking up space in the world, but you've taught me that I don't have to earn love, that I can just be enough, that success isn't about titles. It's about building a life that feels like home. And then she took my hand and placed it on her stomach and said, and I want to be present for this, really present. And I felt my knees go weak because we were going to be parents, because this brilliant, beautiful woman trusted me enough to build a family, because that stupid birthday joke had led us here, to the edge of everything we'd never let ourselves dream of. Our daughter was born the following spring, tiny and perfect, with Claire's green eyes and my terrible timing because she arrived 3 weeks early during my biggest presentation of the year, and I ran out of that boardroom without a second thought, because I'd finally learned what actually mattered. And when I held her for the first time, this impossibly small person who was half me and half the woman I loved, I wept not from fear or obligation, but from overwhelming gratitude that life had given me this, that my careless joke had cracked open both our hearts and let in the light. Now, 5 years later, I watch Claire read bedtime stories to our daughter in the nursery we painted together, and I think about that morning in the conference room. How terrified I was when she didn't laugh. How close I came to apologizing and running away. And I'm grateful I found the courage to knock on her office door, to sit with the discomfort, to choose the scary, beautiful thing instead of the safe, familiar thing. Our daughter asks me sometimes how I knew mommy was the one, and I tell her the truth that I didn't know. Not really. That love isn't about certainty, or perfect timing, or having all the answers. It's about finding someone who makes you brave enough to ask the questions, who sees your worst self and helps you become your best self, who transforms your jokes into promises and your fears into faith. And sometimes it starts with 4 careless words that turn out to be the truest thing you've ever said. Last week, on my 33rd birthday, Claire surprised me with a small box, and inside was a photograph from that day 5 years ago. Someone had captured the exact moment I'd made that joke, my face half laughing and half terrified. And she'd written on the back, "Thank you for the best, worst joke of our lives. I say yes. I'll always say yes. Happy birthday to the man who had the courage to ask." I pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling her heartbeat against mine. And I understood finally that we don't find love. We build it one brave conversation, one vulnerable moment, one choice at a time to show up for each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hardened. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest question, asked in jest but answered in truth, and the willingness to see where that truth might lead. Moral: the most life-changing moments often arrive disguised as jokes, accidents, or careless words. But courage isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about being brave enough to stay when things get real. True love doesn't require perfect timing or circumstances. It requires 2 people willing to be vulnerable, to grow together, and to choose each other every day, even when the world gives them reasons not to. Sometimes the best answer to what if is simply to find out. I never thought 4 words could change my entire life, but when I blurted out, "Will you marry me?" to my boss on my 28th birthday, half drowning in birthday cake and office confetti, I expected her to laugh it off, like she always did with my awkward humor. But instead, Claire set down her coffee, looked me straight in the eyes with that unreadable expression she wore during board meetings, and said softly, "What if I say yes, David?" And in that moment, the entire office seemed to freeze. The laughter died on my lips, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach because Claire wasn't joking. Her green eyes were serious, searching, and suddenly I realized I had opened a door I never intended to walk through. It started as nothing. Really just another ordinary Tuesday morning 3 years ago, when I joined Mitchell and Associates as a junior analyst, fresh out of business school, drowning in student debt, and desperate to prove myself. And Claire was already a legend in the firm, 34 years old, the youngest senior partner in company history, brilliant and untouchable. The kind of woman who commanded respect the moment she entered a room. And I was just another face in the crowd of ambitious 20-somethings, hoping to make partner before we turned 40. Over those 3 years, I'd worked directly under her guidance. Countless late nights reviewing portfolios, early mornings preparing presentations, weekend strategy sessions where she'd bring Vietnamese coffee and I'd bring terrible jokes to lighten the tension. And somewhere in all those shared moments, something shifted. Not romance, exactly, but a comfortable friendship neither of us acknowledged outside those 4 walls. A mutual respect that felt rare and precious in the cutthroat world of corporate finance. She knew about my mother's illness, how I sent half my paycheck home to help with medical bills, how I survived on instant noodles and optimism. I knew about her lonely penthouse apartment, her failed engagement 5 years ago to someone who couldn't handle her success, how she worked 70-hour weeks because going home meant facing the silence she'd built around herself like armor. On my birthday, the team had surprised me with cake during our morning meeting, and riding the high of having just closed a major deal, feeling invincible and stupid, I'd turned to Claire in front of everyone and made that joke. You know what I want for my birthday? For the boss to finally appreciate me. Claire, will you marry me? Expecting her to roll her eyes, maybe throw a pen at me. But instead came those 5 words that changed everything. What if I say yes? The office erupted in nervous laughter, people assuming she was playing along. But I saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly as she gathered her papers. And before I could process what was happening, she'd left the conference room, leaving me standing there with frosting on my tie and a question mark branded on my heart. I couldn't concentrate the rest of the day, kept replaying that moment, the way she'd looked at me like I'd accidentally stumbled onto something true. And when everyone else had gone home, I found myself standing outside her office, watching her through the glass walls as she stared at her computer screen without really seeing it. And I knocked 3 soft taps that felt like the bravest thing I'd ever done. Come in, David, she said without looking up, and I entered, closing the door behind me, my heart hammering so hard I thought she might hear it. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It was a stupid joke, but she finally looked at me then. And I saw tears she was too proud to let fall, and she said, what if it wasn't? What if I told you that I've spent the last year trying to convince myself that what I feel when you're around is just professional admiration, that the reason I look forward to Monday mornings is because of the work, and not because you bring me terrible coffee and make me laugh about things that shouldn't be funny. I stood there, completely unprepared for her honesty, and I realized with stunning clarity that I'd been hiding from the same truth, that somewhere between the quarterly reports and the late-night strategy sessions, I'd fallen in love with this brilliant, guarded woman who trusted me with her vulnerabilities while the rest of the world only saw her strength. But loving someone and building a life with them are entirely different things, and over the next few weeks, we had to confront what this meant: the power dynamics, the office politics, the age difference that didn't matter to us but would matter to everyone else. The fact that I was still paying off student loans while she lived in a penthouse. The reality that she'd built walls so high that letting someone in felt like demolition work. We started meeting outside the office, coffee shops at first, then quiet restaurants where nobody from work would see us. And we freely talked about our fears and dreams, about what marriage even meant to 2 people who'd both watched their parents' relationships crumble, about whether we were brave enough to risk everything we'd built professionally for something as fragile as love. Claire told me about her childhood, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs, how she'd vowed never to depend on anyone, how success became her identity because it was the only thing she could control, and how terrifying it was to want someone more than the next promotion, the next victory. I told her about my father leaving when I was 10, how I'd spent my whole life trying to prove I was worth staying for, how I measured my value in achievements and accolades because I'd never learned to believe I was enough, just as I was, and how the thought of her saying yes to my stupid joke felt like being chosen in a way I'd never experienced. 3 months after my birthday, we told HR, navigated the paperwork, the raised eyebrows, the whispered conversations, and I requested a transfer to a different department to eliminate the conflict of interest, even though it meant delaying my partnership track by at least 2 years, and that decision became the first real test of what we were building, because Claire insisted I shouldn't sacrifice my career for her, and I had to help her understand that choosing us wasn't sacrifice. It was investment in something that mattered more than a title on my door. My mother's health deteriorated that winter, and Claire did something I'll never forget. She drove with me 6 hours to my hometown, met my mom in her small apartment, filled with medical equipment and faded photographs, sat beside her bed and held her hand and listened to stories about my childhood with genuine interest. And later, when we thought my mother was sleeping, I heard her whisper to Claire, "Thank you for seeing him, really seeing him, the way I always hoped someone would." And Claire whispered back, "He saved me first." And I realized that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about showing up for each other's real lives, the messy and mundane and magnificent all tangled together. We got married that spring in a small ceremony, just close friends and family, in my mother's hospital room because she was too weak to travel, and the nurses helped us decorate with flowers and lights. And when I saw Claire walk through that door in a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, smiling through tears, I understood that every awkward moment, every lonely night, every failure and fear had been leading me to this, to her, to us, to the family we were choosing to become. My mother passed away 2 weeks later, peaceful and happy, and Claire held me through the grief, never trying to fix it or minimize it, just being present in the pain. And I learned that true partnership means being strong enough to be weak, brave enough to break, trusting someone to see you at your worst, and love you not despite it but through it. The first year of marriage was harder than either of us expected. We fought about money, about whose career took priority, about how to balance ambition with intimacy, about the little things that become big things when 2 independent people try to build one shared life. And there were nights I wondered if we'd moved too fast, if a joke proposal was really the foundation for a lasting marriage. But then I'd remember the way she looked at me across the breakfast table, like I was her favorite part of the day, or the way she'd leave encouraging notes in my briefcase before big presentations, or how she'd started calling my childhood friends to hear embarrassing stories about me, just because she wanted to know every version of who I'd been. We started going to counseling, not because we were failing, but because we wanted to succeed. And slowly we learned each other's languages. She needed words of affirmation. I needed quality time. She processed by talking. I needed silence first. She showed love through acts of service. I showed it through physical affection, and understanding these differences transformed our conflicts from battles into bridges. 2 years into our marriage, Claire came home early one Tuesday, found me in the kitchen attempting to cook dinner, and said,